Direct and Indirect Speech in French, Part 2 with FrenchSpanishOnline.com. You remember that in the first tense we focus on the present tense. Here we are going to speak about the past tense in the first part of the sentence. The structure actually of the sentence is similar to the English one. The difficulties come from the tenses because there is an agreement, and the pronouns because there is another agreement too. So first let's speak about the pronouns agreement, and we are going to keep the present tense in the first part, not too complicated anything here. So Pierre dit, so Pierre says or he's saying, so the present tense, je veux parler avec mon frère, I want to speak with my brother. This is the direct speech. As you can see here we have je, because Pierre is speaking, so he say je, it is related to him, and he say mon frère, my brother, again related to him, the person who is speaking. The indirect speech now is Pierre dit qu'il veut parler avec son frère. So Pierre said that he wants to speak with his brother. So the same thing actually in English. So you just have to translate it, and here you have il, this time in the indirect speech related to Pierre, and here son, that we can explain this way. Il related to Pierre, and mon becomes son. Let's see another example. Pierre dit elle ne veut pas écrire à ma mère. Pierre says she doesn't want to write to my mother. So here we have elle, actually which is related to nobody, and ma mère, ma, because it is Pierre's mother's. So that's why we have ma mère, because Pierre is speaking. So the indirect speech is Pierre dit qu'elle ne veut pas écrire à sa mère. But ça here, it's a bit difficult to understand in French if you don't know the context, because ça actually can be related to elle or to Pierre. But in the context, because we have the direct speech, we know that it is related to Pierre. So Pierre dit qu'elle ne veut pas écrire à sa mère. Okay, and ma becomes ça. Let's see again the tenses agreement, just to refresh our memory. When we have in the first part, and we are going to name number 1 this part of the sentence, when we have the present tense here, Pierre dit, so present tense, Pierre dit. Well, after we have, for example, je veux parler à ma mère, I want to speak to my mother, the present tense again, direct speech. So now indirect speech, Pierre dit qu'il veut parler à sa mère. So we also have the present tense. As you can see, when in the part 1 we have the present tense, the tense in the part 2 does not change, indirect or direct speech. Let's see another example. Pierre dit, je voudrais parler à ma mère. So here we have the present tense, but here we have the conditional mood. I would like to speak to my mother. So what happened to the conditional mood now in indirect speech? Well, because it is present tense, there is no change. Pierre dit qu'il voudrait parler à sa mère. Conditional mood. Okay, so that's the rule. When we have in the part 1 the present tense, in the part 2 there is no change of your tenses when you go from the direct speech to the indirect speech. Of course, if we are speaking about that, it is because with the past tense it's a bit more complicated, and we are going to see how. So first, Pierre a dit. So Pierre a dit here is the passé composé. But you can also use the imparfait, Pierre disait, or the plus que parfait, Pierre avait dit. So past tense. So when the first part of the sentence is past tense. And after you have either the present tense or the imparfait. So je veux parler à ma mère, I want to speak to my mother, or je voulais parler à ma mère, I wanted to speak to my mother. So présent or imparfait. Here, direct speech. Well, in the indirect speech we just have one tense in the part 2. Again, Pierre a dit or Pierre disait, Pierre avait dit, so past tense. Now, in the indirect speech, Pierre a dit qu'il voulait parler à sa mère. So here we have the imparfait only. So no present tense, just the imparfait. So when you have the present tense or the imparfait, we have in the indirect speech the imparfait, but of course when the first part is past tense. Okay? Present tense imparfait becomes imparfait indirect speech. Another example, Pierre a dit, disait, avait dit, so there is no change, past tense here. Direct speech, j'ai voulu, so the passé composé, or j'avais voulu, the plus que parfait, j'avais voulu parler à ma mère. So I wanted to speak to my mother, or I had wanted to speak to my mother. So when we have passé composé or plus que parfait direct speech, in the indirect speech, we just have le plus que parfait. So le passé composé disappears here. Il avait voulu parler à sa mère. So Pierre a dit qu'il avait voulu parler à sa mère. And we keep le plus que parfait. This is the agreement you need to remember when in the first part of the sentence you have past tense. Let's summarize what we have seen in this part 2. First, present tense here. Well, when we have the present tense in the part 1, in the part 2, there is no change. A bit more complicated with past tense. So when we have the past tense in the part 1, after, it depends if you have passé composé, plus que parfait, etc., etc. So if first, in the direct speech, you have the present tense or imparfait, well, in the indirect speech, you will have just the imparfait. If now in the direct speech, you have le passé composé or le plus que parfait, in indirect speech, you will have only le plus que parfait. Okay? This is what you need to remember to be able to translate with no problem the direct speech to the indirect speech in French when it is about past tense in the first part. You can go now to the website FrenchSpanishOnline.com because c'est fini, and you will have here more exercise, a quiz, to see if you understand and what you have to revise again. Thank you very much for watching these slides with me. See you next time. Au revoir.